In the year 878, a monk named Kild sat hunched over a sheet of vellum in a scriptorium in Winchester. The air was thick with the smell of ink, wax, and the damp chill of an English spring. Outside, the world was a mess. Viking armies had torn through the kingdom of Wessex for years. King Alfred, his patron, had only recently won a decisive victory at the Battle of Edington, securing a fragile peace. The Danes were still here, though, and their influence was everywhere. You could hear it in the language spoken at the market, see it in the designs on the metalwork, and feel it in the air of uncertainty. Sild was not a warrior, he was a scholar tasked by the king with preserving knowledge. He was compiling a book of remedies, a collection of all the medical wisdom he could find. He called it the Lasebach, the Leech Book. He copied from old Latin texts the wisdom of the Greeks and Romans. But he also wrote down the folk knowledge of his own people, the Anglo-Saxons. And he included things he learned from the Norsemen. There were charms and prayers, but there were also practical instructions. On folio 56, he wrote down a treatment for a deep, open wound, the kind a man might get from an axe in a shield wall. The instructions were specific: first clean the wound, then find a particular type of moss, not just any moss. It had to be the pale, spongy kind that grew in the bogs, the peat moss. The book instructed the healer to take this sphagnum moss, dry it, and then pack it tightly into the wound. To a Roman-trained physician, this would have sounded like madness. Packing dirt and swamp weeds into a man's body. It was a peasant's cure, a barbarian's practice. Gross. But Sild wrote it down because he had seen it work. He had seen Norse healers, and the Anglo-Saxon healers who learned from them use this method. They would pack a gaping wound with this moss, and often the bleeding would stop. The wound would not fester, the man would live. Sild didn't know why. He didn't know that centuries later, scientists would discover that sphagnum moss is incredibly absorbent, capable of holding over 20 times its own weight in liquid. He didn't know it creates an acidic, low-oxygen environment that bacteria hate. And he didn't know it contains phenolic compounds that act as a natural antiseptic. He just knew what he saw. In a world of gods, spirits, and mysterious afflictions, here was something real, something that worked. So he dipped his quill in the ink pot and carefully wrote down the gross, true fact, preserving a piece of Viking Age medical practice for a future that would one day understand its science. Number 17, they fought infection with maggots and spiders. The year is 991. Near the coast of Essex, a boy named Wulfstan lies on a pallet of straw inside a smoky hut. He is maybe 10 years old. A few days ago, he was climbing a tree to get at a bird's nest and fell. A jagged branch tore a deep gash in his thigh. His mother cleaned it as best she could with boiled water and herbs, but it was not enough. The leg is now swollen, the skin around the wound a dark, angry red. It weeps a thick, yellow fluid that stinks of decay. Wulfstan has a fever. He shivers and sweats, his eyes glassy. Everyone knows what this means. The rot has set in. He will likely be dead by the end of the week. His father, a farmer named Godwin, has done everything he can think of. He has prayed to the Christian God. He has also left an offering of grain for the old spirits of the land, just in case. Finally, in desperation, he sent for a woman who lived by the marshes. Her name was Era. She was not a Christian. She was a Dane, her family having settled in the area a generation ago. She was known as a healer, a wise woman. Some whispered she was a witch. Godwin did not care. He just wanted his son to live. Era arrives at dusk. She is old, her face a roadmap of wrinkles. She doesn't say much. She kneels by the boy and unwraps the poultice of leaves from his leg. The smell hits her, but her expression does not change. She examines the wound carefully, her fingers probing gently around the swollen edges. Wulfstan cries out in pain. Era nods. Slowly, she looks at Godwin. The flesh is dead, she says, her voice raspy. It poisons him. We must clean it out. Godwin assumes she means she will take a knife and cut away the rot. A terrible, painful procedure that the boy might not survive. But Era does something else. She reaches into a small leather pouch at her belt and pulls out a wooden box. Inside the box, crawling over a piece of damp cloth, are dozens of small, pale maggots, the larva of the green bottle fly. She had been breeding them for this purpose. Godwin's wife gasps and backs away. Godwin himself feels his stomach turn. This is unnatural. This is unclean. Era ignores them. With a steady hand, she begins to place the maggots directly into the open, festering wound. One by one, they disappear into the decaying flesh. Wulfstan is too weak to protest. He just stares, his feverish eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What are you doing?" Godwin demands, his voice trembling. "They will eat him alive." "No," Era says, her voice calm and firm. "They will not touch the living flesh. They eat only the dead. They eat the rot. They will clean the wound better than any knife." She explains that she knows this fly, knows its young. They are particular. They leave the healthy pink tissue alone. They will secrete fluids that kill the sickness and help the new skin grow. She has seen it many times. It is a gift from the earth. For 2 days, the maggots do their work. Era stays with the family, changing the damp cloths that cover the wound and keeping the maggots contained. While she brews a bitter tea from willow bark for the boy's fever, slowly, miraculously, the fever begins to break. The angry redness around the wound starts to fade. The terrible smell lessens. On the 3rd day, Era carefully flushes the wound with clean water, and the now fattened maggots are washed away. The wound is cleaner than Godwin could have believed possible. The flesh inside is raw and pink, but it is alive. The next step is to close it and protect it. Era goes out into the rafters of the barn where spiders have been busy. She returns with a thick wad of clean, dusty cobwebs. Godwin looks on, his skepticism now replaced with a kind of awe. She gently packs the cobwebs onto the raw wound. "This will stop any weeping," she explains, "and it will keep the air devils out." She then binds the leg with clean linen strips. Wulfstan lives. The wound heals, leaving a jagged, ugly scar that he will carry for the rest of his life. But he lives. Godwin pays Era with a side of cured pork and a silver coin, a fortune for him. He never again calls her a witch. He understands that she knows things that he does not, things that are not written in the priest's books. The practice seems disgusting, using insects and the refuse of spiders to heal a human body. But for Era, it was simple logic. She observed the natural world. She saw what the maggots ate. She knew that cobwebs were strong and clean and seemed to seal a cut better than anything else. Centuries later, science would confirm what she knew through observation. Maggot debridement therapy is still used today to clean wounds that won't respond to antibiotics. And scientists have found that cobwebs have antiseptic and antifungal properties and are rich in vitamin K, which helps blood to clot. For Wulfstan, lying in his hut in 991, it was not science. It was a gross, terrifying, and beautiful magic that saved his life. Number 16, they carved grooves into their teeth to look terrifying. The year is 1002 on the Swedish island of Gotland, in a trading town bustling with merchants from the east and west. A young man named Styrbjorn sits on a stool, gripping its legs until his knuckles are white. He is about to become a man. Not by rite of passage, but by choice. He is about to join a crew of warriors, and they have a certain look. In front of him kneels an old man named Hake, a craftsman who works with bone and metal. Hake is not a healer. Today, he is a different kind of artist. In his hand, he holds a small, sharp metal file. Styrbjorn opens his mouth. Hake goes to work on his upper front teeth. The sound is high-pitched and grating, the scrape of metal on enamel. Styrbjorn tenses with every stroke. It doesn't hurt, not exactly, but the vibration goes through his skull. It is an intensely unpleasant sensation. Hake is meticulous. He is not just scratching the teeth. He is carving 3 perfectly straight horizontal grooves into each of the 4 front teeth. The work is slow and precise. It takes the better part of an hour. When he is done, Hake wipes the tooth dust from Styrbjorn's mouth. The young man runs his tongue over his new teeth. They feel strange, ridged, and rough, but the work is not finished. And Hake then takes out a small pot of black paste, a mixture of charcoal and plant resin. Using a fine-tipped tool, he carefully fills the newly carved grooves with this paste. He works it in deep, then scrapes away the excess. He repeats this for all 12 grooves. The process is tedious. Finally, he gives Styrbjorn a piece of leather to bite down on and polish the surface. Styrbjorn looks at his reflection in a piece of polished bronze. The effect is startling. When he smiles, or rather snarls, his teeth look striped. The black lines stand out starkly against the white of the enamel. He looks feral, he looks like a predator, he looks like the other men on the crew. This was not a fashion statement. It was not about beauty, it was a form of psychological warfare. Imagine you are a farmer in a small English village. You are woken in the night by screams and the smell of smoke. You grab your pitchfork and run out to defend your home. You are met by a wall of shields, and over the top of those shields you see the faces of the raiders. They are screaming, their eyes wide, their beards braided. And when they open their mouths to roar their war cries, you see their teeth. Striped, grooved, inhuman, in that moment of shock and terror, you might hesitate, and that hesitation is all they need. This practice was not widespread across the entire Viking world. It seems to have been a specific cultural marker, perhaps for a certain warrior guild or group. Archaeologists have found dozens of skulls with these modifications, primarily in Sweden, but also in Denmark and even in a mass grave of Vikings executed in Dorset, England. The craftsmanship is often remarkable, suggesting it was done by skilled artisans like Hake. The grooves are too regular and precise to be accidental or the result of wear. They were intentionally carved. For Styrbjorn, the pain and discomfort were an investment. It marked him as a member of an elite group. It was a signal to other Vikings that he was a serious warrior, someone who had endured pain to craft his own image. It was a commitment. You could not easily undo this, and to his enemies, it was a terrifying brand. It was a way of saying, we are not like you. We are something else, something to be feared. It was a form of medicine in reverse, not healing the body, but weaponizing it. A gross and painful modification that served a very real and very brutal purpose on the battlefields of the Viking Age. Number 15, they fed a man onion soup to see if he would die. The longhouse was filled with the sounds of a raid's aftermath. Not the triumphant cheers of victory, but the groans of the wounded. It is the year 845, and a fleet of Norse ships has just returned from sacking Paris. They are rich with silver and silk, but many men are wounded. One of them is a young warrior named Ketil. He took a spear to the gut. The wound itself is not large, just a small, dark puncture below his ribs. But everyone knows that such wounds are the most dangerous. He lies on a bed of furs, pale and sweating. His friends have brought him to Astrid, the wife of the chieftain. She is the one who knows about healing. As she has seen many wounds like this, she knows that the man's fate depends on a simple question: did the spear pierce the stomach or the intestines? If it did, then the filth from inside the man's own body will leak into his belly. A terrible, consuming fire will start, and he will die in agony within a few days. There is no cure for this. If the spear missed the gut, however, and only tore through muscle, he has a good chance of survival. But there is no way to see inside a man's body. Astrid does not waste time with poultices or charms. Not yet. First, she must know the answer to that one crucial question. She goes to the cooking fire and ladles a thick, pungent broth into a wooden bowl. It is made with leeks, onions, and strong-smelling herbs. The smell fills the corner of the longhouse where Ketil lies. She brings the soup to him. "Drink this," she commands. Ketil is in too much pain to eat, but he obeys. He sips the hot, strong-smelling liquid. His friends watch in silence. This is the test. It is a simple and brilliant piece of diagnostic medicine born from centuries of observation. After Ketil has finished the soup, Astrid leans in close to the wound on his belly. She doesn't look at it. She smells it, she closes her eyes and inhales deeply, her nose just inches from the bloody hole. The men hold their breath. The only sound is the crackle of the fire and Kajetil's shallow breathing. After a long moment, Astrid pulls back. She shakes her head slowly, her face is grim. "I can smell the onions," she says quietly. A collective sigh of despair goes through the small group of warriors. They know what this means. The spear did not miss. It tore through the wall of his stomach or intestines. The onion soup he just drank is now leaking through that hole, out of his gut and into his body cavity. The smell, faint but unmistakable, is coming from the wound itself. There is nothing more to be done for him. Astrid will not waste her precious herbs or her time on a man who is already dead. She gives him a drink of water with poppy juice in it to dull the pain and help him sleep. She says a quiet prayer for his journey to the next world. Then she moves on to the next man, a warrior with a shattered arm that she might be able to set. This practice, often called the onion test, was a brutally effective form of battlefield triage. In a situation with many wounded and limited resources, a healer had to decide who was salvageable and who was not. They could not afford to waste time and energy on a man with a perforated bowel, as there was no surgery they could perform to fix it. The infection that followed, peritonitis, was a guaranteed and painful death sentence. It was a grim, but necessary, piece of medical logic. It provided a clear, if heartbreaking, diagnosis. The strong smell of the allium family onions, garlic, leeks was easily detectable. If the smell was present at the wound site, the digestive tract was breached. The man was beyond saving. If there was no smell, the wound was likely superficial, and the healer could begin the work of cleaning and stitching it. It was a life-or-death diagnosis made with a bowl of soup and a good sense of smell, a gross but profoundly practical tool in the desperate world of Viking Age medicine. For Kajetil, it was a death sentence delivered by the smell of his last meal. Number 14, they drilled holes in skulls to let the madness out. Bjarni was not the same after the raid. It was the year 930 in the newly settled lands of Iceland. During a skirmish over a property line, he had been struck on the head with the flat of an axe. He hadn't been wearing a helmet. The blow had knocked him unconscious, but his skull had not broken open. He awoke with a blinding headache, but he seemed otherwise fine. In the weeks that followed, however, a change came over him. He suffered from terrible headaches that left him blind with pain. He would have fits, his body shaking uncontrollably, foam on his lips. He complained of a constant pressure inside his head, a demon trying to get out. He became moody and aggressive, quick to anger over the smallest thing. His family was afraid of him. The farm work was not getting done. His wife Gudrun was desperate. She consulted the local priest who prayed over him, but the fits continued. She consulted an old woman who knew charms, but the words did nothing. Finally, she sent for a man named Thorir, who lived 2 valleys over. Thorir was not a priest or a wizard. He was a farmer, but he had a reputation. He knew how to fix things. Not just fences and tools, but bodies. Thorir arrived and spent a long time observing Bjarni. He listened to Gudrun describe the blow to the head and the changes in her husband's behavior. He felt Bjarni's skull, his thick fingers probing for any irregularity. He made his decision. "There is bad blood and pressure on the brain," he announced. "From the blow. It has nowhere to go. We must make a door for it." The procedure was prepared. It was done in the main room of the farmhouse, with Bjarni's family holding him down. First, Thorir gave Bjarni a large dose of a powerful sedative, likely made from henbane or poppy, to dull his senses. He would not be unconscious, but hopefully docile and less aware of the pain. Then Thorir shaved a patch of hair from Bjarni's head. He took a sharp knife and made a cut in the scalp, pulling the skin back to expose the white bone of the skull. Then came the gross and terrifying part. Thorir took out his tools. They were not medical instruments. They were woodworking tools, adapted for a new purpose. He had a small, pointed drill, an awl, which he would turn by hand. He placed the tip of the drill against Bjarni's skull. Then, slowly and carefully, he began to scrape. It was not a fast process. He would scrape and scrape, creating a circular groove in the bone. Shavings of bone dusted the area. He had to be incredibly careful not to press too hard, not to plunge the tool through the skull and into the soft, delicate brain beneath. The sound was sickening, a dry, rasping scrape that seemed to echo in the silent room. Bjarni groaned and struggled against the hands that held him, but the drug and the pressure of his family kept him still. The Thorir worked with intense concentration, his face beaded with sweat. After what seemed like an eternity, there was a slight change in the sound. He had broken through the inner layer of the skull. A small amount of dark venous blood welled up from the hole. The Thorir had created a small, circular hole in Bjarni's skull, perhaps a centimeter in diameter. He had successfully performed a trepanation. He cleaned the area, packed it with moss, and laid the flap of scalp back over the wound, stitching it crudely with a needle and gut string. This procedure seems barbaric to us, drilling a hole in a living person's head. But it was a surprisingly common and sometimes successful surgery in the ancient world, including the Viking Age. Archaeologists have found numerous skulls from this period with clear evidence of healed trepanation. The smooth, rounded edges of the bone around the hole indicate that the person lived for months or even years after the operation. What was the purpose? For a head injury like Bjarni's, it was likely to relieve a subdural hematoma, a buildup of blood between the skull and the brain that puts pressure on the brain tissue. This pressure can cause the exact symptoms. Bjarni was experiencing headaches, seizures, and personality changes. Releasing that pressure by drilling a hole could, in some cases, lead to a full recovery. They did not understand the neurology, but they understood cause and effect. A blow to the head causes a problem inside. Making a hole can fix it. Of course, it was incredibly dangerous. The risk of infection was enormous. A slip of the hand could be fatal. And for conditions not caused by pressure, like mental illness or epilepsy with no traumatic origin, it would have done nothing but add injury to illness. But in a world without brain scans or modern surgery, it was a desperate, hands-on attempt to solve a problem inside the most mysterious part of the body. For Bjarni, if he was lucky, the release of pressure might have brought him back from the brink of madness, his life saved by a farmer with a woodworking tool and an incredible amount of nerve. Number 13. They fought rabies by boiling a dog's head. It is a late summer day in the year 10 in a small farming settlement in Norway. A dog, one of the farm's best hunters, has gone mad. It began a few days ago. The dog, usually friendly, became sullen and aggressive. It refused to eat. It snapped at anyone who came near. Then the madness took hold. It ran wildly around the farmstead, foaming at the mouth, biting at the air, at trees, at anything that moved. Before the men could corner it and kill it with a spear, it attacked a young farmhand named Olav, sinking its teeth deep into his calf. The dog is dead now, but the fear it left behind is very much alive. Everyone knows about the mad dog sickness. They know that a bite from such an animal is a death sentence. In a few weeks or maybe a month, Olav will start to feel unwell. He will develop a fear of water. He will become aggressive and confused. And then he will die a terrible, agonizing death. There is no known cure. Olav's father, Harold, refuses to accept this. He will not simply let his son die. He consults the sagas and the local healers, seeking any remedy, no matter how strange. He finds one, a desperate folk cure passed down through generations. It is a grim and repulsive recipe. First, they must take the head of the rabid dog that bit Olav. They cut it from the body, and following the instructions, they singe off all the fur in the fire until the skin is black and cracked. Then they take a large cauldron, fill it with water, and place the dog's head inside. They set it over the fire and boil it. So they boil it for hours until the meat falls from the bones and the water is a thick, greasy soup. The next step is even more bizarre. They must take the boiled, jellied meat from the dog's head and mix it with rye flour to make a kind of bread or cake. This is the medicine. Olav must eat this cake. The logic, as far as it can be understood, is a form of sympathetic magic. The sickness came from the dog, therefore the cure must also come from the dog. By consuming the essence of the creature that afflicted him, he might be able to overcome the poison. There are other parts to the ritual. The ashes from the dog's incinerated body are to be rubbed into the wound itself. And specific charms and incantations must be spoken over Olav as he eats the disgusting meal. He is a terrified young man, facing not only his own mortality, but also a cure that seems like a punishment. But he does it. He eats the cake made from the head of the dog that bit him, hoping it will save his life. Did it work? Almost certainly not. Rabies is a viral disease that attacks the nervous system. Once symptoms appear, it is virtually 100% fatal even today without immediate and aggressive post-exposure treatment. Eating cooked meat from the infected animal would have no effect on the virus already multiplying in Olav's body. The virus is concentrated in the brain and saliva, so handling the head was extremely dangerous. So why did such a remedy exist? It existed because of desperation. Rabies was a terrifying and mysterious disease. In the absence of a real cure, people will cling to anything that offers a sliver of hope. The belief in, cures is an ancient one. The ritual itself, with the fire, the boiling, the incantations, gave the family a sense of agency. And they were doing something. They were fighting back against a terrible fate, instead of just passively waiting for death. And there is another possibility. The incubation period for rabies can be highly variable, from a few weeks to, in very rare cases, over a year. It's possible that someone long ago was bitten by a dog that was not actually rabid, or the bite did not transmit the virus. They performed this ritual, and when they did not get sick, the ritual was deemed a success. The story was told, and the cure was passed down. In a world without the scientific method, a single coincidence could be mistaken for a miracle, creating a folk remedy that was both completely ineffective and deeply gruesome. For Olav, it was a last disgusting meal on a path that led, inevitably, to a terrible end. Number 12, they washed their wounds with urine. The sea battle was a chaotic mess of splintering wood, clanging steel, and screaming men. It is the year 870, and a small fleet of Viking longships has engaged a flotilla of Saxon vessels off the coast of East Anglia. In the fighting, a man named Finn gets a nasty cut on his forearm from a glancing sword blow. It's not deep enough to be life-threatening, but it's bleeding freely, and in the filth of battle, any open wound is an invitation to infection. There is no time to properly tend to it. The fight rages on. Finn needs to stop the bleeding and clean the wound as quickly as possible. He looks around. There is no clean water. The ship is slick with sea spray, sweat, and blood. There is no moss, no herbs, no medical kit at hand. All he needs an antiseptic, and he needs it now. So he does what he and every other warrior on the ship would do in this situation. He unlaces his trousers and urinates directly onto the open wound on his arm. The initial sting is sharp and intense, but he grits his teeth and bears it. He lets the hot stream of his own urine flush the cut, washing away the blood and grime. Then he tears a strip from his tunic, soaks it in more of his urine, and binds it tightly around his forearm. He picks up his axe and gets back to fighting. To us, this sounds utterly repulsive and unhygienic. The idea of using a bodily waste product on an open wound seems like a recipe for a raging infection. But the Vikings were pragmatic people. Their medical knowledge was based on generations of trial and error. And in this case, their gross practice had a surprising amount of scientific validity. Fresh urine from a healthy person is sterile. Or at least, it's very close to it. It does not contain the harmful bacteria that you would find in dirty water, on a battlefield, or in the soil. So, as a cleaning agent, when nothing else is available, it's a far better option than, for example, scooping up some seawater, which is teeming with microbes. It acts as a sterile saline solution, flushing debris from a wound, but there's more to it than that. As urine ages and breaks down, Its urea content converts into ammonia. Ammonia has powerful antimicrobial properties. It is a disinfectant. This is why aged urine was a valuable commodity in the Viking world, though for different purposes, like tanning leather and washing clothes. A process called fulling, which used the ammonia to strip oils from wool. For wound care, the fresh, sterile urine was for flushing, but the practice may have been informed by the knowledge that this particular fluid had cleansing power. The Vikings knew that urine could clean things, so it was a logical leap to assume it could clean a wound. The practice was not unique to the Vikings. It was a common folk remedy across many ancient cultures, from the Romans to the peoples of the Americas. In a pre-germ theory world, it was one of the few readily available sterile liquids. When the choice is between a dirty wound and a wound cleaned with urine, the latter is the far safer bet. So for Finn, on the deck of his longship, this was not a desperate, disgusting act, it was standard procedure. It was the quickest, most effective way to care for a minor wound in the middle of a battle. He cleaned it, disinfected it to a degree, and the pressure from the binding helped stop the bleeding. It was a piece of practical, if unpleasant, battlefield first aid. His action, which seems so backward and gross to us, probably prevented a life-threatening infection and allowed him to live to fight another day. Number 11, they stopped bleeding by searing wounds with a hot axe. The raid had gone badly. It is the year 954, near the city of York. A group of Norsemen led by a chieftain named Eric Bloodaxe have been ambushed. In the chaotic retreat, a warrior named Halfdan took a sword cut to the lower leg. It was a deep, vicious blow that severed not only muscle, but also a major artery. Blood is pumping from the wound in rhythmic spurts, soaking his trousers and pooling on the ground. He is already pale and dizzy. He is bleeding to death, and quickly. His comrades drag him behind a rock outcropping. They know they have only minutes. There is no time to find a healer. They have to stop the bleeding themselves. One of the men, a veteran named Ulf, takes charge. He looks at the gushing wound and knows that simple pressure will not be enough. The artery is cut. They need to seal it. And Ulf barks an order. Build a fire now. The men scramble to gather dry twigs and brush. As they work, Ulf pulls the large, heavy battle axe from his belt. It is the tool that deals death, but now it must be a tool of life. He gives the axe to another man. Get the head of this in the flames. Get it glowing. Halfdan is conscious, his eyes wide with fear and pain. He knows what is about to happen. There is no alcohol, no poppy, nothing for the pain. Ulf and another man hold him down, pinning his shoulders and his good leg to the ground. The fire roars to life, and the man with the axe thrusts the heavy iron head into the heart of the flames. The weight is agonizing. Halfdan groans, his life's blood still pouring from his leg. Ulf presses a wad of cloth into the wound, but it is quickly saturated. The axe head in the fire begins to glow. First a dull red, then a brighter orange. "Is it ready?" Ulf shouts. The man nods. He pulls the axe from the fire. The metal hisses. Ulf tears the blood-soaked cloth away from Halfdan's leg, exposing the mangled, bleeding flesh. "Hold him," he roars. Then he takes the glowing hot axe head and presses it firmly into the open wound. The sound is horrific, a loud sizzle, the smell of cooking meat filling the air. Halfdan screams, a raw, inhuman sound of pure agony, and then his body goes limp as he passes out from the shock and pain. Ulf holds the hot metal in place for a few long seconds, pressing it against the source of the bleeding. When he pulls the axe away, the wound is a blackened, charred crater, but the bleeding has stopped. The intense heat has seared the flesh and cauterized the severed blood vessels, sealing them shut. This brutal procedure was often the only option for a catastrophic wound, especially an amputation or a severed artery. Without the ability to tie off individual blood vessels surgically, cauterization was the only way to prevent a fatal hemorrhage. It was excruciatingly painful and carried a massive risk of infection, as the burn created a large area of dead tissue perfect for bacteria to grow in. But infection was a problem for tomorrow. Bleeding to death was a problem for the next 2 minutes. The choice of tool was one of convenience. A warrior always had his axe. On a battlefield or in a remote camp, it was the largest piece of iron available. Heating it in a fire was simple. Other tools could be used, like a sword blade or a designated cauterizing iron if a healer was present, but the axe was the soldier's field expedient solution. If Halfdan survives the shock and the inevitable infection, his leg will be horribly scarred and likely crippled. But he will be alive. His life will have been saved by the same type of weapon that threatened to end it. The act of pressing a glowing hot axe into a man's flesh is one of the most violent and gross images imaginable. But in the medical reality of the Viking Age, it was not an act of torture. It was a desperate, agonizing, and sometimes successful act of healing. Well, it was surgery at its most primal. Number 10, healing chants were a form of potent medicine. Solveig sits by her daughter's bedside, her heart heavy with fear. It is the year 890 in a fjord-side village in western Norway. Her daughter, a small girl of 6 named Runa, is sick with a lung ailment. Her breathing is a shallow, wet rattle, and her body is hot with fever. The local healer has given her potions made of licorice root and thyme, which help to soothe the cough, but the sickness remains deep in her chest. The healer has admitted she can do no more. In her desperation, Solveig turns to another kind of healing. She sends her son to fetch an old man from the next farmstead. His name is Brand, and he is known as a Geldrkarl, a man skilled in the art of Gelder, or incantations. He is not a healer of the body, but of the spirit. He arrives as the sun is setting, a tall, gaunt figure with eyes that seem to look through you. He does not bring herbs or bandages. He brings only himself. He enters the small, dark house and stands over the sick child. He listens to her breathing for a long moment. Then he begins his work. He starts to chant. His voice is low and rhythmic, a guttural hum that seems to make the very air in the room vibrate. The words are in an old form of the Norse language, filled with alliteration and powerful, resonant sounds. He is not singing a song. He is weaving a spell with sound. He chants about the 9 diseases and their origins. He calls upon the strength of the earth and the sea. He invokes the names of the gods, not in a pleading prayer, but as a command. He calls on Odin, the master of runes and magic, to lend his power. He calls on Air, the goddess of healing, to guide his words. He chants a spell to bind the health shot, the invisible arrows of sickness that he believes have struck the child. As he chants, he makes specific gestures over Runa's body, his hands tracing patterns in the air. He might carve a rune, like the Uru's rune for strength, onto a piece of wood and place it under the child's pillow. He continues for what seems like hours. The repetitive, hypnotic sound of his voice fills the small space. Solveig sits and listens, her fear slowly being replaced by a sense of calm, a feeling that a powerful force is now engaged in the fight for her daughter's life. To a modern observer, this is pure superstition. Chanting nonsense words over a sick child cannot possibly cure pneumonia. But to the Vikings, the physical and the spiritual were not separate. They believed that disease could be caused by malice, by curses, by evil spirits, or by upsetting the natural balance of the world. Therefore, a purely physical cure might not be enough. The spiritual root of the illness also had to be addressed. The Galger was not just a prayer, it was seen as a technology. The act of chanting specific words in a specific way was believed to literally alter reality. The sound vibrations, the intent of the chanter, the power of the ancient words themselves, all of these were thought to have a tangible effect. It was a form of medicine aimed at the unseen world, and there is a psychological component that cannot be dismissed. For Solveig and her daughter, the arrival of Brand and his powerful ritual transformed their experience. They were no longer passive victims of a disease. They were active participants in a spiritual battle. The chanting would have had a powerful calming effect, a form of hypnosis that could reduce stress and fear. For a sick child, this reduction in anxiety could slow her heart rate and breathing, which might have a genuine, if small, positive impact on her physical state. It gave the family a sense of hope and control in a helpless situation This is the placebo effect in its most primal form. The Vikings did not see a conflict between using herbs and using chants. They were two different tools for the same problem. The herbs treated the body, the chants treated the soul and fought the invisible causes of the illness. One of the most famous healing spells, the Mersburg Charm, which has a Norse pagan counterpart, is a spell for setting a broken bone. The chanter describes Odin healing his horse's broken leg with magic words. Bone to bone, blood to blood, limb to limb, so be they glued. This was to be chanted while physically setting the bone. The physical and magical acts were intertwined, two halves of a single procedure. Brand's chanting may not have killed the bacteria in Runa's lungs, but it was considered an essential and potent part of her treatment. Number 9. Women healers walked a fine line between reverence and persecution. The year is 970. In a prosperous Icelandic settlement, a woman named Thordis is known for her skill in healing. She is a midwife, having delivered nearly every child in the valley for the past 20 years. She knows the herbs that can ease labor pains and the ones that can stop a mother from bleeding to death after birth. Her knowledge of setting bones is unmatched. When a man is gored by a bull, it is Thordis they call for, not the priest. She can stitch a wound so neatly, the scar is barely visible. She is a respected and essential member of her community. Her knowledge was passed down from her mother, who learned it from her mother before her. It is a deep well of practical observational medicine. But Thordis is more than just a herbalist and a bone setter. She also knows the other side of the healing arts. She can read the signs and the flights of birds. She can enter a trance and, as she claims, speak with the spirits of the land to discover the cause of a mysterious illness that affects the cattle. This part of her practice makes people nervous. They call her a vulva, a seeress. When she is healing their children, they praise her. But when the crops fail or the herring don't run, they look at her with suspicion. One day, the chieftain's son falls gravely ill. He is a strong young man, but a fever has taken hold of him and he is wasting away. The family calls for Thordis. She examines the boy, gives him teas, and sits with him through the night. But he does not improve. The family grows desperate. The chieftain's wife, a proud and jealous woman who has always distrusted Thordis, begins to whisper. "This is no natural sickness," she says to her husband. "This is witchcraft. Thordis has looked upon our son with an evil eye. She wants his strength for her own." The fear spreads like a disease itself. The community that once revered Thordis now looks at her with fear. Her knowledge, once seen as a gift, is now reframed as a dark and dangerous power. Her ability to heal implies an ability to harm. If she can use herbs to save a life, surely she knows which herbs can take one. If she can speak to spirits for good, perhaps she commands them for evil. This was the dangerous paradox for female healers in the Viking world. In the domestic sphere, women were the primary caregivers. They were the ones who tended to the sick, delivered the babies, and knew the properties of the local plants. An experienced older woman in a community was its de facto doctor and pharmacist. This practical knowledge gave them a great deal of informal power and respect. However, when this knowledge crossed into the realm of the supernatural, it became dangerous. The line between a wise woman healer like Nakona and a sorceress, Volva, or Saidkona was perilously thin. The practice of cider, a form of magic primarily associated with women, involved trance states, divination, and attempting to manipulate fate. It was seen as powerful, but also unseemly and dangerous, even by pagan Norse standards. The god Odin practiced cider, but it was considered an unmanly art for him to do so. So a woman like Thordis occupied a precarious position. Her success was her greatest asset and her greatest liability. Every baby she delivered, every bone she set, built her reputation. But if a patient died, as the chieftain's son eventually does, that same reputation could turn against her. Grief and fear need a place to go, and the powerful, mysterious woman who was the last one to treat the deceased was an easy target. The whispers against Thordis grow louder. She is accused of murder by witchcraft. In the sagas, accusations of sorcery are a common plot device, and they often lead to tragic ends. A woman accused of being a witch could be stoned, drowned, or burned alive inside her own house. Thordis is now in mortal danger. Her deep knowledge of both the natural and supposedly the supernatural world has made her a cornerstone of her community, but it has also made her a scapegoat. The very skills that made her so valuable are now the evidence being used against her. She walked the line between reverence and persecution her whole life, and now, through no fault of her own, she has stumbled onto the wrong side. Number 8, they boiled reindeer antlers to make a health tonic. The winter of 865 has been long and hard in the north of Norway. For the community of a chieftain named Sigurd, the stored food is running low. The people are weary, their bodies aching from the cold and the lack of fresh food. They suffer from what they call seamen's scurvy, bleeding gums, aching joints, and a profound sense of exhaustion. They need something to restore their strength. Sigurd sends his best hunters out onto the tundra. They are not just looking for meat. They are looking for reindeer, specifically for their antlers, not the hard, bony antlers of a mature bull, but the velvet antlers of a young animal, the newly grown antlers that are still soft and covered in a furry skin. They return with their prize. The antlers are brought to the longhouse. They are not a food source in the normal sense. They are medicine. The women take the velvet antlers and slice them into thin rounds. They are full of blood and soft cartilaginous tissue. They place these slices into a cauldron of water and set it to boil. The mixture is simmered for hours, sometimes days, creating a thick, gelatinous broth. The smell is gamey and strong. This antler broth is then doled out to the members of the community, especially the weak, the elderly, and the children. It is considered a powerful tonic, a substance that can restore vitality, strengthen bones, and ward off the sicknesses of winter. They drink the thick, strange-tasting soup as if it were a magical elixir. This practice, which seems like a bizarre folk remedy, is rooted in careful observation of the natural world. The Vikings and the Sami people from whom they likely learned this practice saw that reindeer were creatures of incredible stamina and vitality. They could survive the harshest winters, and they possessed a unique biological marvel every year. They grew a massive set of antlers, a huge amount of bone and tissue in just a few months. This is one of the fastest rates of tissue growth in the entire animal kingdom. The people reasoned that the substance of these rapidly growing antlers must contain a powerful life force. They were not entirely wrong. Modern science has analyzed the composition of velvet antler. It is a rich source of proteins, amino acids, minerals like calcium and magnesium, and most importantly, growth factors. It contains collagen, which is essential for joints and connective tissue, and glucosamine and chondroitin, compounds now widely sold as supplements for joint health. While it wouldn't cure scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency, the nutrient-dense broth would have provided a much-needed boost of minerals and proteins to a population on a restricted winter diet. The collagen and other compounds could have genuinely helped soothe the aching joints that were a symptom of both scurvy and the hard life they lived. The psychological effect was also important. In the depths of a dark, cold winter, the act of preparing and consuming this special tonic was a ritual of hope. It was a proactive step to fight back against the weakness and despair of the season. It was a way of consuming the very essence of the strong, resilient reindeer, hoping to take on some of its characteristics. So while the idea of boiling down a fuzzy, bloody antler and drinking the resulting goo is certainly gross, it was not just superstition. It was a form of nutritional supplementation, Viking style. They identified a substance in their environment that was associated with strength and rapid growth, and they found a way to consume it. You know, it was a practical, if unappetizing, way to extract valuable nutrients from their surroundings and fortify their bodies against the challenges of a harsh northern climate. Number 7, they used animal afterbirth in rituals for difficult childbirth. Inga is in labor. It is the year 900 in a small farming community in Denmark. This is her first child, and things are not going well. The labor has gone on for 2 days. She is exhausted, her strength is failing, and the baby will not come. The midwife, an experienced older woman named Freya, has tried everything she knows. She has had Inga walk, squat, and lie in different positions. She has massaged her belly with warm oils. She has given her herbs to strengthen the contractions. Nothing is working. Fear is starting to creep into the small, dark room. A long labor often means a dead mother, a dead baby, or both. Freya decides it is time for more powerful medicine. This is a spiritual problem, a blockage that cannot be cleared by physical means alone. She sends Inga's husband Lars out to the stables. His instructions are specific and strange.
Find the mare that foaled last week, she tells him.
Bring me the afterbirth. What she passed after the foal was born. Lars does as he is told, though he does not understand. He goes to the pit behind the stables, where such things are disposed of, and retrieves the horse's placenta. It is a large, bloody, and unpleasant-smelling membrane. He brings it back to the house. Freya takes the afterbirth. Well, she does not give it to Inga to eat or use it as a poultice. Instead, she begins a ritual. She takes the horse's placenta and ceremonially buries it under the threshold of the house. As she does so, she chants an incantation, a plea, or a command to the spirits of the land and the house to allow the birth to proceed as easily as the mare's birth did. The logic of the magic is clear, as this symbol of a successful birth is interred and put to rest, so too will the difficult labor of the woman inside come to a successful end. Another part of the ritual might involve taking a piece of the afterbirth and having the laboring woman step over it, or even draping it over her belly. The idea was to transfer the easy birth essence of the mare to the struggling human mother. Horses were powerful and important animals in Norse culture, and their strength and vitality were things to be harnessed both physically and magically. A mare, a large and powerful creature, usually gives birth with relative ease. The ritual was an attempt to magically bestow that same ease upon Inga. This is a clear example of sympathetic magic. The afterbirth of the mare is a physical object that represents a completed, successful birth. By manipulating this object in a ritual way, the healer attempts to influence the outcome of the ongoing difficult birth. It is a way of imposing a desired narrative onto a chaotic and dangerous reality. Did it work? From a medical standpoint, of course not. Burying a horse placenta outside has no physiological effect on a woman's uterine contractions, but we cannot underestimate the psychological power of such a ritual. For Inga, who is terrified and exhausted, this act could have been a powerful psychological intervention. It showed her that the midwife was not giving up, that she was deploying her most powerful tools. It could have given Inga a renewed sense of hope and determination. The reduction in fear and stress might have allowed her body to relax, which in some cases can help a stalled labor to progress. The use of afterbirth and other animal products in folk medicine for childbirth was common in many cultures. It stems from a time when the processes of birth and death were deeply mysterious and steeped in magic. To us, retrieving a decomposing placenta from a dung heap and using it in a birthing room is incredibly unhygienic and gross. But for Freya and Inga, it was a sacred act, a desperate appeal to the forces of nature, using a potent symbol of life and successful birth to try and save two lives that were hanging in the balance. Number 6, they set broken bones with twigs, cloth, and animal guts. The forest floor is slick with wet leaves. It is the autumn of 985 in the deep woods of Sweden. A man named Gunnar is out hunting. He slips on a mossy rock and falls awkwardly, his full weight landing on his right leg. He hears a sickening crack, followed by a surge of white-hot pain. He knows immediately what has happened. His tibia, the large bone in his lower leg, is broken. The sharp end of the bone presses against the skin from the inside. He is miles from home, and he cannot walk. His hunting partner Sten manages to get him back to their village, a painful, jarring journey on a makeshift stretcher. They take him to the home of an old man named Kale, who is known for his skill with such injuries. Kale is not a magician. He is a practical man who has learned his craft through long experience. Kale's first job is the most painful. He has to set the bone. There is no anesthetic, only a horn of strong ale and a leather strap for Gunnar to bite down on. With Sten holding Gunnar's shoulders, Kale takes hold of the broken leg. He has to pull hard and steady to get the two broken ends of the bone to separate enough so he can manipulate them back into alignment. Gunnar screams into the leather strap, his body rigid with agony. Kale feels with his expert fingers along the bone, pushing and turning until he feels the two ends grate against each other and then slot back into place. The leg is now straight again. The next step is to immobilize it. Kale does not have plaster of Paris. Well, he has to make a splint from the materials at hand. He sends a boy out to cut straight, strong saplings of hazel or ash. He measures them against Gunnar's leg, ensuring they run from his ankle all the way up to his thigh to immobilize the knee and ankle joints as well. He then needs padding. He takes scraps of wool and linen cloth and even some of the moss used for dressing wounds and wraps it thickly around Gunnar's leg. This is to prevent the hard splints from rubbing against the skin and causing sores. It also provides a snug fit. Finally, he places the wooden splints around the padded leg. Now he must bind them, and bind them tightly. A rope would work, but it can slip. Kale has a better material. He goes to his store of supplies and returns with long, thin strips of a translucent, stringy material. And it is animal sinew, the tendons from a deer or a cow, or sometimes even strips of gut. When dry, it is hard and strong. When soaked in water, it becomes pliable. Kale soaks the strips of sinew in a bucket of warm water until they are soft. Then he begins to wrap them around the splints, starting at the ankle and working his way up. He wraps them tightly, his strong hands pulling the splint package together until it is completely rigid. As the wet sinew dries over the next day, it will shrink, tightening the splint even further, creating a custom-fit cast that is surprisingly strong and light. Gunnar is instructed not to put any weight on the leg for many weeks. He will be confined to his bed, a burden on his family, but he will live. Kale will come to check on him to make sure the toes are not swelling or turning blue, a sign that the wrapping is too tight and cutting off blood flow. If all goes well, the bone will knit. In a few months, Kale will cut the sinew bindings and remove the splints. Gunnar will be weak, his legs stiff, but he will walk again. This method of setting and splinting a fracture is remarkably effective. The principles are exactly the same as modern orthopedic medicine: reduce the fracture, set the bone, and immobilize it until it heals. The Vikings, through observation and practice, had perfected a technique using only the materials available in their environment. The use of animal gut and sinew as a binding agent that tightens as it dries is a particularly clever piece of bioengineering. It was a gross and painful process requiring immense fortitude from the patient and a great deal of skill from the healer. But it meant that a broken leg, an injury that in many other circumstances would lead to a crippling disability or death, could be properly healed. Number 5, their medicine cabinet was often a stinking bog. The year is 820. On the coast of Jutland in Denmark, a young woman named Ragna is gathering supplies. She is not at the market or in the fields. She is at the edge of a great peat bog. To most people, the bog is a dangerous, mysterious place. It is a place where the land is not quite solid, where mists hang low, and where the bodies of sacrificed people are sometimes preserved for centuries in the acidic, oxygen-poor water. But to Ragna, who is learning the healing arts from her grandmother, the bog is a place of power. It is her medicine cabinet. She wades into the shallow, tea-colored water, her feet sinking into the spongy ground. She is looking for specific plants. First, she gathers great handfuls of the pale green sphagnum moss that grows in thick clumps. She knows its power for wounds. It can stop bleeding and keep a cut from going bad. She will take it home and lay it out to dry, creating a supply of natural, highly absorbent and antiseptic bandages. Next, she looks for a low-lying shrub with leathery leaves that give off a sweet, resinous scent when crushed. This is bog myrtle. She knows that a tea made from its leaves can help with stomach pains and that the smoke from burning it can drive away pesky insects. More importantly, she knows it is a key ingredient in brewing strong ale, not just for the flavor, but because it seems to make the ale last longer without spoiling. She doesn't know about its antibacterial properties, but she knows it works. She moves deeper, looking for the telltale white flowers of marsh marigold. The leaves are poisonous if eaten raw, but she knows that if they are boiled properly, they can be made into a poultice to soothe skin irritations and sores. Nearby, she finds sundew, a strange carnivorous plant with sticky, glistening droplets on its leaves. Her grandmother taught her that the juice from this plant, when applied carefully, can burn away warts. The bog provides other medicines too. The peat itself, the dark, rich soil made of partially decayed plant matter, is a valuable resource. When dried and burned, it is a source of fuel. But Ragna also knows that a plaster of wet peat can be used to treat certain skin ailments, and that the smoke from a peat fire seems to keep the air in the longhouse cleaner. The acidic water of the bog, which pickles and preserves, is also known to be a good wash for skin that is festering. This reliance on wetlands for medical supplies was common in the Viking world. Bogs and marshes are unique ecosystems, and the plants that grow there have evolved unique chemical properties to survive in the acidic, low-nutrient environment. Many of these chemicals have potent medicinal effects. The Vikings, as keen observers of their environment, learned to identify and utilize these plants. The bog was a place of paradox. It was a place of death and preservation, a gateway to the other world. But it was also a source of life and healing. To us, the idea of packing a wound with something from a stinking swamp or making medicine from a plant that eats insects is gross and primitive. But for Ragna, it was a source of powerful and effective remedies. The bog was not just a wasteland, it was a living pharmacy. She respected its dangers, but she also understood its gifts. Her journey into the bog was not just a gathering trip, it was a journey to a sacred place to collect the tools of her trade, tools that could mean the difference between life and death for someone in her village. Number 4. They knew which mushrooms could kill and which could cure. A group of warriors sits around a fire in a temporary camp in the forests of what would one day be Russia. It is the year 907, and they are part of a massive Rus expedition heading towards Constantinople. One of the men, a giant of a man named Svein, is not feeling well. For 2 days, he has been suffering from a terrible flux, a bloody dysentery that has left him weak and dehydrated. In the field, with no proper healers, this kind of sickness can easily be a death sentence. The leader of the warband, a shrewd veteran named Hrolf, sees Svein's condition. He knows he cannot afford to lose a good warrior to a gut sickness. He calls over a man named Finn, a quiet man from the northern forests of Scandinavia, who is known for his strange knowledge of the woods. Finn, Hrolf says, Svein is sick. Is there anything in this forest that can help him? Finn nods. He disappears into the damp, dark woods. He is not looking for leaves or roots. He is looking for fungi. He ignores the brightly colored, enticing-looking mushrooms. He knows that many of these are deadly. He is searching for a specific type, a fungus that grows on the trunks of birch trees. He finds what he is looking for, a large, lumpy, black growth that looks like a lump of burnt charcoal. It is the chaga mushroom. He uses his knife to pry a chunk of the hard, cork-like fungus from the tree. It is not something you would ever think of as edible. It looks like a disease on the tree itself. He brings it back to the camp. He takes the black chunk and, with some effort, breaks it into smaller pieces. He puts these pieces into a pot of water and sets it to boil over the fire. The water slowly turns a dark, rich brown like strong tea. The smell is earthy and a little bitter. After it has simmered for a long time, he pours the dark liquid into a cup and takes it to Svein. "Drink this," he says. "All of it." Svein, in his misery, does not argue. He drinks the strange, bitter tea. Finn makes him drink several cups of it over the course of the day. Slowly, over the next day, a change occurs. The cramping in Svein's gut begins to ease. The bleeding lessens. By the third day, the flux has stopped. He is still weak, but the sickness has passed. The chaga tea has worked. The Vikings' relationship with fungi was complex and cautious. They knew that some mushrooms, like the deadly deathcap or the destroying angel, could kill a man in agony. They also knew of the hallucinogenic properties of others, like the fly agaric, which may have been used ritually by shamans or berserker warriors, a theory that is still debated. But they also, through generations of trial and error, identified certain fungi that had powerful medicinal properties. Chaga is a prime example. It is not a food, but a medicine. Modern science has shown that chaga is packed with antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, and polysaccharides that can boost the immune system. It has also been shown to have antiviral and antibacterial properties. For Svein's dysentery, which was likely caused by a bacterial infection from contaminated water, the antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties of the chaga tea could have had a direct therapeutic effect. Another important fungus was the tinder fungus, which grows in a hoof shape on the side of trees. Its primary use was for carrying fire, as it can hold a smolder for hours. But it was also used medicinally. The soft, felt like inner layer was used as a wound dressing, and it was also burned as a form of moxibustion, where the smoldering fungus was held near the skin to treat joint pain, a practice also found in traditional Chinese medicine. This knowledge was hard-won. For every Finn who knew the difference between a healing mushroom and a deadly one, there was likely a story of someone in the past who had made a fatal mistake. The knowledge was passed down carefully, an essential part of the survival toolkit. For the Vikings, the forest floor was a place of both poison and panacea. Understanding the difference was a matter of life and death, and that knowledge allowed a man like Finn to brew a life-saving medicine from a lump of what looked like ugly burnt wood. Number 3, personal hygiene was a serious and sometimes competitive business. The year is 1013. A ship carrying a Norse merchant named Thorhall has just docked at a quay on the River Thames in London. Thorhall has been at sea for weeks, and he is eager to get to the business of trading his walrus ivory and furs. But his first stop is not the marketplace. His first stop is a bathhouse. He pays a small fee and spends the better part of an hour soaking in a large wooden tub of hot water, scrubbing the grime of the voyage from his skin with a coarse cloth and a harsh soap made from lye and animal fat. After his bath, he unpacks a small leather pouch. Inside is a set of personal grooming tools, his most prized possessions after his sword. There is a comb, beautifully carved from a piece of deer antler, which he uses to meticulously comb his long blonde hair and his impressive beard. There is a small pair of bronze tweezers, which he uses to pluck any stray hairs, and there is a tiny, delicate spoon, also made of bronze, called an ear spoon. He uses this to scrape the wax from his ears. When he is finished, he is clean, his hair and beard are neat, and he feels like a new man. An English chronicler from the time, John of Wallingford, complained bitterly about the Vikings' habits. He wrote that they were far too popular with the English women because they combed their hair every day, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes frequently. In his eyes, this was a form of cunning deceit, a way to seduce the local women. His complaint reveals a fascinating truth. The Vikings, far from the filthy, shaggy barbarians of popular imagination, were often cleaner and more fastidious about their personal grooming than the other Europeans they encountered. This obsession with hygiene was not just about vanity, it was practical medicine. In a world without antibiotics, preventing infection was key. Keeping clean was a primary defense against skin diseases, parasites like lice and fleas, and the infection of minor cuts and scratches. A clean body was a healthier body. The regular combing of hair and beards was not just for looks, it was a daily delousing. The ear spoon, while seeming a bit gross to us, was a way to prevent impacted earwax, which could lead to hearing loss and infections. Archaeological digs of Viking graves and settlements have unearthed a huge number of these grooming tools, and combs are one of the most common finds. Tweezers, ear spoons, and even razors are also frequently discovered. These were not just functional items, they were often beautifully decorated, showing the value placed upon them. They were carried by men and women alike. The Saturday bath day, called Lagardagur in Old Norse, literally washing day, was a deeply ingrained cultural tradition. This is the origin of the word for Saturday in all modern Scandinavian languages. It was a day for the whole family or community to wash. They would use saunas or bathhouses where available, or simply heat water in a large cauldron. The use of hot water and steam was not just for cleaning, it was also a social occasion and was believed to be good for soothing sore muscles and opening up the lungs. Iceland, with its abundant geothermal activity, was famous for its natural hot springs, which were used as communal baths year-round. So while Thorhall's grooming routine might seem a bit fussy for a hardened Viking trader, it was an essential part of his life. It kept him healthy on long voyages. It made him a more pleasant person to be around, which was good for business. And as John of Wallingford noted, it made him more attractive. His clean hair, neat beard, and lack of body odor gave him a distinct advantage, both in the marketplace and in the eyes of the local women. For the Vikings, good hygiene was a tool, a social lubricant, and a form of preventative medicine. Number 2, they diagnosed disease by tasting and smelling bodily fluids. An old healer named Ulfhild is examining a wealthy farmer who has been ailing for months. The year is 940 in a well-established settlement in the Danelaw region of England. The farmer, a man named Leofric, complains of a constant, maddening thirst, a hunger that is never satisfied, and a profound weakness that has left him unable to work his fields. He also has to urinate constantly, day and night. Ulfhild listens patiently. She is a woman of great experience, and she has seen this constellation of symptoms before. She asks Leofric for a sample of his urine. He provides it in a small clay pot. Ulfhild does not just look at the color or clarity of the urine. She does something that would make a modern doctor recoil. She dips her finger into the pot and tastes it. Her face is impassive. She notes the taste. It is sweet. She then takes the pot and places it on the ground outside the house. She tells the family to watch it. Within an hour, ants and other insects are drawn to the pot, crawling over the rim to get at the liquid inside. Ulfhild knows the diagnosis. She calls it the pissing evil, but she understands its nature. She tells the family that Leofric's water is sweet, like honey. This sweetness, she explains, is draining the life and strength from his body. There is no cure for it, but she can give him herbs to manage the symptoms and a diet to follow. She prescribes a diet low in grains and high in meats and fats and certain bitter herbs to counteract the sweetness. Now, Ulfhild has just diagnosed what we now call type 1 diabetes. The name diabetes mellitus literally means siphon diabetes and honey sweet mellitus. Ancient physicians across the world, from India to Egypt, had discovered the same diagnostic method. In the absence of chemical tests, the only way to detect the excess sugar that spills into the urine of an uncontrolled diabetic was to taste it. The fact that insects were also attracted to it was a further confirmation. It was a gross but incredibly astute piece of clinical observation. This use of taste and smell was a fundamental part of a Viking Age healer's diagnostic toolkit. They had no microscopes, no blood tests, no x-rays. Their own senses were their primary instruments. They would smell a patient's breath. A sweet, fruity smell could indicate the same pissing evil. A foul, fecal smell could point to a bowel obstruction. An ammonia-like smell could suggest kidney failure. Yes, they would examine and smell the sputum coughed up from the lungs. The color, consistency, and odor could tell them about the nature of a lung ailment. They would smell the pus from a wound to determine if it was becoming dangerously infected. The good pus was thick and white, while the bad pus was thin, watery, and foul-smelling. They would even taste a patient's sweat. A healer might lick the skin of a sick person to see if it was unusually salty. This could be a sign of certain fevers or other imbalances in the body's humors, as they understood them. Today we know that extremely salty sweat is a key diagnostic indicator for cystic fibrosis. This was medicine at its most intimate and, to our sensibilities, most disgusting. It required the healer to overcome any sense of revulsion and use all of their senses to gather information about the patient's internal state. It was a messy, smelly, and profoundly personal process, but it was also effective. By carefully observing the body's outputs, a skilled healer like Ulfhild could make surprisingly accurate diagnoses for a range of conditions. Her methods were primitive, but her clinical reasoning was sound. Tasting Leofric's urine was a nauseating act, but it was also a brilliant piece of diagnostic science. Number 1. The healer's first duty was to decide who was not worth healing. The battle is over. It is the year 1014. The field at Clontarf near Dublin is littered with the bodies of the dead and the cries of the wounded. A great victory has been won by the Irish High King Brian Boru against a Viking coalition, but the cost has been immense on both sides. Amid the carnage, healers move among the fallen, doing their grim work. One of these healers is a Norse woman named Hrefna. She is not young, and she has seen many such fields. She moves with a practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the wounded men. Her job is not simply to heal. Her first and most important task is triage. She must decide who can be saved, who might be saved, and who must be left to die. Her resources are limited, a small supply of moss, linen, and herbs. Her time is precious. She cannot waste it on the hopeless. She comes across a young warrior, barely a man, with a terrible gash across his belly. His intestines are spilling out onto the muddy ground. He is conscious, his eyes pleading with her. Hrefna takes one look at the wound. She does not need the onion soup test for this one. She can see the damage. She knows that even if she could clean the wound and push his organs back inside, the filth has already spread throughout his belly. He will die of infection. She kneels beside him, but not to treat him. She gives him a drink of water from her flask, a small kindness. She speaks a soft word to him, a brief prayer for his journey. Then she stands up and walks away, leaving him to his fate. She feels a pang of pity, but no guilt. This is the hard logic of her profession. She moves on. She finds another man with an arrow sticking out of his shoulder. The wound is bleeding, but not profusely. The man is in pain, but he is strong and alert. This man is salvageable. Hrefna goes to work. She breaks the shaft of the arrow and, with a quick, brutal push, shoves it all the way through his shoulder so the arrowhead comes out the other side. Pulling a barbed arrowhead back out would do far more damage. She then cleans and packs both wounds. She has made a good investment of her time. This process of selection is described in the Norse sagas. The saga of Thormod Kolbrun's poet details how a healer woman inspected the wounds of men after a battle by giving them a stone to hold, believing the color of the stone would indicate the nature of the wound. A more practical account in the Icelandic sagas describes a wound test. A healer would examine the depth and location of a wound to determine if it had pierced the body cavity, the kvider hole, or the brain case, the hilahus. If it had, the man was considered fager or fated to die. No attempt at healing would be made. This was not a callous or cruel practice, a pragmatic response to the realities of ancient warfare and medicine. Healers like Hrefna had to make impossible choices. To spend an hour on a man with a fatal gut wound meant that 3 other men with treatable injuries like broken limbs or flesh wounds might die from blood loss or shock while they waited. Her duty was not to each individual patient, but to the fighting force as a whole. She had to save as many warriors as possible to ensure the group's survival. The decision was not always so clear-cut. She might come across a man with a shattered thigh bone. He is not immediately dying, but the injury is severe. Can she set it properly here on the field? Does he have the strength to survive the pain and the high risk of infection? Yeah, is it worth the time and resources? These are the calculations she must make over and over in a landscape of death and suffering. To be a healer in the Viking Age was to carry a heavy burden. It required not only a knowledge of herbs and bones, but also a stomach of iron and a heart that could withstand making life or death decisions every few minutes. The grossest fact of Viking medicine might be this. The healer's most important skill was not knowing how to heal, but knowing with cold certainty when not to even try. It was a grim but necessary science of survival,